So the introduction to the chapter. What is all this about, right? He starts with Kierkegaard, Soren Kierkegaard, who is actually a pretty important philosopher for me too. And you know, he's talking about Kierkegaard, who's living and writing 100 years ago. And again, this is to me another one of those instances where it's like, please don't, like, when you read something that's 10 years old, like, disregard it by saying, oh, like, this doesn't apply anymore. When was this written? Like, don't do that. Okay, just don't. But he's using Kierkegaard as an example to kind of show, right, like, that the concerns that we have now, people before us had too, right? Some things, you know, just don't go away. And specifically on 93 to 94, it's suspicion of a general public, right? He's talking about the general public. And specifically, it's a general public that's been weaned onto images that are produced by the ruling class, right? So, you know, this idea of, like, who are those that are in power, who have power, and what is their relationship to the general public, right? This is something that, you know, we have a great suspicion of in the U.S. as well, right? Some more than others. But specifically, this idea of, like, the role that images play, like a suspicion of images, right? Especially because the idea is that the images are produced by the ruling class because they serve by the ruling class. And of course, like, Kierkegaard is not the only one to talk about this, whether then or now. So to kind of bring it to today, on 95 to 96, from the end of 95 to 96, he brings in Bernard Stiegler, and Stiegler talking about, in our times, the quote-unquote, the outsourcing of cognitive and of affective matters. And affective matters. So our cognition, but also our affect, like, sort of, you know, the way that we feel, becomes outsourced to technologies. So it's as if technology does our cognition and our affect for us. They feel for us. They kind of see, hear, listen, and read for us. And also, at the same time, a downgrading of knowledge to information. And experience to know-how. Again, like, from the very bat, this is kind of difficult stuff, but just kind of try and take this in as best as possible. I think an example of something like this would be talking points, bullet points, right? Not kind of, again, like, sort of long-form prose, but, you know, like, here, you know, here's the data that shows ... and that means that we know ... You know, if you think of something like just the internet, period, right? And to be fair, again, like, you know, like, this is a critique, right? That something is being lost. Doesn't mean there's not anything to be gained. But Stiegler's kind of pointing out, you know, think about just, like, the amount of expertise. I'm thinking specifically of WikiHow, like, you know, like, how to disinfect your house. That's kind of stemming from this kind of, like, specific sort of genre of kind of internet content, right? It's not quite the same as a sort of direct, sort of trial and error experience, right? By the way, if it's not clear, like, I'm trying to work through this even as I kind of sort of, like, talk about it right now. On 96, this is about near the bottom, about 6 lines from the bottom of that partial paragraph. But this kind of direction of a visual and indexical materiality. So again, like almost every turn of phrase, every term is technical. These are difficult terms, excuse me. So again, like I don't expect any of us to kind of just like digest this immediately. And I can only do so much between you and me. I'm kind of running on fumes today. So it's not the best reading to be doing today, or to be going over today. But, you know, we have time to kind of, whether it's on Moodle or otherwise, that bypasses processes of rationalization. And so what he's talking about is that generally, if there was some sort of mental or intellectual process where we turn things into rationale, right? So I have visual stimuli around the room, I take it in, I kind of, roll it around up here, and then I kind of process it. Now there's a way in which every stimuli is, for one, it's all visual, and it's all indexical, it all indexes, it's all a trace of something, and it's materiality, like it's a material that's kind of self-evident. And so basically this is a kind of more sophisticated way of saying that we're being conditioned into a way that because everything is so visual and whatnot, we're just not really kind of using our sort of faculties nearly as much. That's what this all comes down to, is like we're dulling the kind of the human experience, I would say, like or like just like like how we go about in the world. It's so immediate, right? So you can see why this is a kind of more expansive. It's not unrelated to people saying like, oh, people like complaining that people have short attention spans and everything is so kind of like gimme, gimme, gimme. It's not unrelated from that, but he's trying. It's kind of going a lot further than what most of us will generally do. So as examples of this, of a kind of like shortening, we're going from summarizing things to citing, right? So, and this is very similar, even though we're talking about summaries, this is very similar to what I've been talking about in terms of class, where like the editorializing or the citing, or not the citing, that's a Freudian slip. The editorializing or the intervention. And so imagine if I was doing the same lecture and all I did was point out this line, point out that line, point out this line, point out that line. That would be what he's talking about, that's what we're doing now. Instead of if I were trying to explain and give more examples and sort of expand, I'm making an intervention between this reading and then you all, right? But if I were to just go like, this, that's what he's talking about, what we're doing, right? This is, like when people say this, is a perfect example of what Simonowski is talking about, right? So I think he gives a really salient example right after that, in the sense when he talks about, we're moving from a way where it's like I watch a video and I'm like, oh, that's interesting, hey, this happens and I think that means this, but instead of just going, right? I've done that on video too, right? And so this is why he's being rigorous. He actually says, yes, we are gaining some things, right? What are we gaining? On 97, the very top, we're gaining a sensory nimbleness. So like a dexterity or a kind of agility in terms of like how we navigate. So we're very quick at like picking up stuff, right? Very, very quick, right? Very easy for me to go from here to here to here to here to there, right? Camcorder, computer, iPad, iPhone, Mac. Even being able to say that quickly, like it's not something we can be taken for granted. But it comes at the expense of cognitive acuity. A sharpness of mind, right? So I can go really quickly between these things, but how much kind of depth with which can you talk about those things, right? Does that make sense? So I can very quickly move from talking about identity politics to gun control to abortion to the pandemic, but how far can I take those topics is really what they're talking about. And that's, I think, the difference between a reading like this, between what often we do, is like, what are the pros and cons? When people do a pros and cons model, oftentimes I find they've already made their minds up. They're not actually kind of like trying to really wrestle with the sort of duality of something, right? They've already kind of like agreed. This is much more like trying to really grapple, right, with that sort of trade-off, and then ultimately find like, well, he would. I think all these authors are saying like, no, like this is not equal to this, and this is much more important than this. But conversely, like if you can actually, to the same sufficient degree, argue for the need for sensory nimbleness over cognitive acuity, me personally, I'm okay with that. But it's simply like, you can't just do like, no, that's stupid, no, you. Like, that's not good enough, right? You have to bring something comparable to the table, right? And what I'm actually arguing for, as for us who are living in the 21st century, and I don't know how someone like Stiegler or Simonowski would think, but isn't it great if you can have both? Incredibly difficult, but wouldn't that be great? Right. And then finally, for this section, on 97, at the very bottom of that full paragraph, the second full paragraph, near the bottom, last few lines, whether this argument holds or not, it does not exactly undo the charge so the charge, what is the charge? That new media are turning us into mere decoders of language, of information, rather. A lot of Freudian slips today. And encouraging a kind of unreflective wakefulness. So, you know, like on the playground, it's like there are those instigators where it's like one kid will say something to another kid, and a third kid will say, "You're gonna let him get away with that?" That's what I'm gonna do right now. He's calling you and me mere decoders of information, and that we have unreflective wakefulness. I want us to take this seriously. I want us to take all of this seriously. What does this mean? That as if there's just like data and information in the world, and we look at it, and instead of sort of processing it, thinking about it, reflecting about it, you know, kind of sitting in it, dwelling in it, interpreting it, sharing it, we just decode. It's just like, so thinking in terms of code, as if everything is binary, as if everything has a strict knowable correlative, as if there's no contingency, there's no potentiality. This x is, 1 plus 1 equals 2, 2 plus 1 equals 3. There's only one possible answer to everything, and we just go through the world. 1, 2, 3, 6, 8, and that's all we do. Unreflective, that we never for a moment take, we're just not critical. We don't think about ourselves. We don't stop and think about what we're doing. We don't think about what my practice is, but at the same time, a wakefulness. We are conscious, we are cognizant, we are awake, right? But what is being awake without being reflective? It's just, this is a very sophisticated way of saying, like, all we're doing is popping off. Popping off without, for a moment, thinking about what I'm doing wrong, right? I think this is something very kind of important to think about. Okay, moving on.